Chapter 3 of A House to Let. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. A House to Let by Charles Dickens, Wilkie Collins, Elizabeth Gaskell, Adelaide Ann Proctor. Chapter 3. Going into Society. At one period of its reverses, the house fell into the occupation of a showman. He was found registered as its occupier on the parish books of the time when he rented the house, and there was therefore no need of any clue to his name. But he himself was less easy to be found, for he had led a wandering life, and settled people had lost sight of him, and people who plumed themselves on being respectable were shy of admitting that they had ever known anything of him. At last, among the marshlands near the river's level that lie about Deptford and the neighbouring market gardens, a grizzled personage in velveteen, with a face so cut up by varieties of weather that he looked as if he had been tattooed, was found smoking a pipe at the door of a wooden house on wheels. The wooden house was laid up in ordinary for the winter, near the mouth of a muddy creek, and everything near it, the foggy river, the misty marshes, and the steaming market gardens, smoked in company with the grizzled man. In the midst of this smoking party, the funnel chimney of the wooden house on wheels was not remiss, but took its pipe with the rest, in a companionable manner. On being asked if it were he who had once rented the house to let, grizzled Velveteen looked surprised, and said yes. Then his name was Magsman. That was it, Toby Magsman, which lawfully christened Robert, but called in the line, from a infant, Toby. There was nothing agin Toby Magsman, he believed. If there was suspicion of such, mention it. There was no suspicion of such, he might rest assured, but some inquiries were making about that house, and would he object to say why he left it? Not at all. Why should he? He left it along of a dwarf. Along of a dwarf? Mr. Magsman repeated deliberately and emphatically, along of a dwarf. Might it be compatible with Mr. Magsman's inclination and convenience to enter as a favour into a few particulars? Mr. Magsman entered into the following particulars. It was a long time ago, to begin with, afore lotteries and a deal more was done away with. Mr. Magsman was looking about for a good pitch, and he see that house, and he says to himself, I'll have you, if you're to be had. If money'll get you, I'll have you. The neighbours cut up rough and made complaints, but Mr. Magsman don't know what they would have had. It was a lovely thing. First of all, there was the canvas, representing the picter of the giant in Spanish trunks and a ruff, who was himself half the height of the house, and was run up with a line and pulley to a pole on the roof, so that his head was coeval with the parapet. Then there was the canvas, representing the picter of the Albina lady, showing her white hair to the Army and Navy in correct uniform. Then there was the canvas, representing the picter of the wild Indian, a scalping a member of some foreign nation. Then there was the canvas representing the picter of a child of a British planter, seized by 2 boa constrictors. Not that we never had no child, nor no constrictors neither. Similarly, there was the canvas representing the picter of the wild ass of the prairies. Not that we never had no wild asses, nor wouldn't have had 'em at a gift. Last, there was the canvas representing the picter of the dwarf, and like him too, considering, with George the Fourth in such a state of astonishment at him as His Majesty couldn't with his utmost politeness and stoutness express. The front of the house was so covered with canvases that there wasn't a spark of daylight ever visible on that side. Magsman's Amusements, 15 foot long by 2 foot high, ran over the front door and parlour windows. The passage was a arbour of green baize and garden stuff. A barrel organ performed there unceasing. And as to respectability, if threepence ain't respectable, what is? But the dwarf is the principal article at present, and he was worth the money. He was wrote up as Major Tuprashovsky of the Imperial Bulgarian Brigade. Nobody couldn't pronounce the name, and it never was intended anybody should. The public always turned it, as a regular rule, into Chopsky. In the line he was called Chops, partly on that account, and partly because his real name, if he ever had any real name, which was very dubious, was Stakes. He was a uncommon small man, he really was. Certainly not so small as he was made out to be, but where is your dwarf as is? He was a most uncommon small man, with a most uncommon large head. And what he had inside that head nobody ever knowed but himself, even supposing himself to have ever took stock of it, which it would have been a stiff job for even him to do. The kindest little man as never growed. Spirited, but not proud. When he travelled with the spotted baby, though he knowed himself to be a natural dwarf, and knowed the baby's spots to be put upon him artificial, he nursed that baby like a mother. You never heard him give a ill name to a giant. He did allow himself to break out into strong language respecting the fat lady from Norfolk, but that was an affair of the art, and when a man's art has been trifled with by a lady, and a preference give to a Indian, he ain't master of his actions. He was always in love, of course. Every human natural phenomenon is. And he was always in love with a large woman. I never knowed the dwarf as could be got to love a small one, which helps to keep 'em the curiosities they are. One single idea he had in that head of his, which must have meant something, or it wouldn't have been there. It was always his opinion that he was entitled to property. He never would put his name to anything. He had been taught to write by the young man without arms, who got his living with his toes. Quite a writing master he was, and taught scores in the line. But Chops would have starved to death afore he'd have gained a bit of bread by putting his hand to a paper. This is the more curious to bear in mind, because he had no property, nor hope of property, except his house and a sarser. When I say his house, I mean the box, painted and got up outside like a regular six-roomer, that he used to creep into with a diamond ring, or quite as good to look at, on his forefinger, and ring a little bell out of what the public believed to be the drawing-room window. And when I say a sarser, I mean a chaney sarser, in which he made a collection for himself at the end of every entertainment. His cue for that he took from me. "Ladies and gentlemen, the little man will now walk 3 times round the carawan and retire behind the curtain." When he said anything important in private life, he mostly wound it up with this form of words, and they was generally the last thing he said to me at night afore he went to bed. He had what I consider a fine mind, a poetic mind. His ideas respecting his property never come upon him so strong as when he sat upon a barrel organ and had the handle turned. Arter the wibration had run through him a little time, he would screech out, "Toby, I feel my property coming. Grind away. I'm counting my guineas by thousands, Toby. Grind away. Toby, I shall be a man of fortune. I feel the mint a-jingling in me, Toby, and I'm swelling out into the Bank of England. Such is the influence of music on a poetic mind.